The thunderclap that split the sky sent the horses into a frenzy, and Rebecca Kensington knew she was going to die before the wagon even tipped. The world turned sideways as hooves pounded against packed earth, the reins whipping from her hands like angry snakes. Her body slammed against wood and iron, pain exploding through her ribs as the heavy wagon crushed her beneath its weight. She couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, could only feel the terrible pressure squeezing the life from her lungs as dust filled her mouth, and the storm raged overhead. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard bootfalls, heavy, purposeful strides cutting through the chaos of wind and rain. Then a voice, deep and commanding, shouted something she couldn't make out. The crushing weight shifted slightly, and she gasped, drawing in a painful breath that felt like swallowing glass. The wagon groaned and creaked, rising impossibly upward, and suddenly the pressure was gone. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, pulling her free from the wreckage. "Do not move," the voice said, clearer now. "I need to check if anything is broken." Rebecca's vision swam as she blinked up at the man kneeling beside her. Rain pelted his face, streaming down the brim of his hat, but his gray eyes were steady and focused. He moved with practiced efficiency, his hands gentle but firm as they ran along her arms, checking each bone with careful precision. "Can you feel this?" He pressed against her wrist. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. He continued his examination, his fingers moving to her collarbone, then down her ribs. She winced when he reached her left side. "Might be bruised, but I do not think they are broken." "Your legs." She tried to move them, relief flooding through her when both responded. "They are fine." "You are lucky." He sat back on his heels, studying her face. "That wagon could have killed you. You lifted it." Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. "By yourself. Adrenaline makes a man strong." He stood, extending his hand. "Can you stand?" She took his hand, gasping as pain shot through her side. He caught her immediately, his arm wrapping around her waist to support her weight. "Easy now. My camp is not far. You need shelter from this storm. My wagon, my supplies, will still be here tomorrow. Come on." Rebecca had no choice but to lean against him as they walked. Each step sent sharp pains through her torso, but his steady presence kept her moving forward. Through the sheets of rain, she could barely make out a small camp nestled against a rocky outcropping. A canvas tarp had been strung between two trees, and beneath it, a bedroll and saddlebags lay protected from the downpour. He guided her under the shelter and helped her sit against a smooth boulder. "I am going to start a fire. You are shivering." She realized he was right. Despite the warm June evening, shock had set in, and her whole body trembled. She wrapped her arms around herself as he worked, watching him gather dry kindling from a protected hollow in the rocks. Within minutes, he had flames crackling in a small pit, the smoke curling upward to dissipate into the stormy sky. "Thank you," she said finally. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not been here." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "What is your name?" "Rebecca Kensington. I was traveling to St. Joe, Missouri. I have family there, an aunt who runs a boarding house." "Preston Xavier." He pulled a blanket from his bedroll and draped it over her shoulders. "You were traveling alone." "My father was supposed to accompany me, but he fell ill 2 days before we were to leave. He insisted I go ahead, that he would follow when he recovered. I thought I could manage the journey by myself." She laughed bitterly. "Clearly, I was wrong. The storm spooked your horses." "Could have happened to anyone." Preston settled across from her, his back against a tree trunk. "How far from St. Joe were you?" "Maybe 20 miles. I was hoping to reach it by tomorrow evening." "Your wagon is badly damaged." "The axle is cracked, and you lost most of your supplies when it tipped. Even if the storm clears, you will not be able to continue in it." Rebecca closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She had sold nearly everything she owned to finance this trip, to escape the suffocating life her stepmother had planned for her back in Independence. Now she was stranded in the wilderness with a stranger, injured and without provisions. "Hey," Preston's voice softened. "We will figure something out. For now, just rest. You have been through an ordeal." She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The fire's warmth was beginning to seep into her bones, and exhaustion was overtaking the adrenaline that had kept her alert. She watched Preston through heavy eyelids as he moved about the camp, checking his gear and ensuring everything was secure against the storm. There was something calming about his presence, a quiet competence that made her feel safe despite their circumstances. When she woke, pale morning light filtered through the trees, and the air smelled clean and fresh after the rain. Preston was already up, crouching by the fire as he cooked something in a small pan. Her body ached everywhere, and when she tried to sit up, she groaned involuntarily. "Take it slow," Preston said without turning around. "You are going to be sore for a few days." "That is an understatement." Rebecca managed to prop herself against the boulder, wincing at every movement. "What are you making?" "Salt pork and beans. Not fancy, but it will give you strength." He divided the food onto 2 tin plates and brought one to her. "Eat." The food was simple but surprisingly good, and Rebecca realized she was ravenous. They ate in companionable silence, and when she finished, Preston took her plate and cleaned both in a nearby stream. "I am going to check on your wagon," he said when he returned. "See what can be salvaged. I will come with you. You should rest." "I can walk." She stood slowly, testing her weight. Everything hurt, but she could move. "They are my belongings." Preston studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Stubborn. Practical." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Together, they made their way back to where the wagon lay on its side like a wounded animal. In the daylight, the damage looked even worse than Rebecca had feared. The canvas cover was torn, supplies scattered across the muddy ground. Her trunk had burst open, and her clothes were strewn everywhere, soaked and ruined. She knelt beside the wreckage, picking up a blue cotton dress that had belonged to her mother. Mud caked the hem, and a long tear ran up the side. Something inside her chest cracked, and suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that she could not control. Preston crouched beside her, his presence solid and grounding. He did not try to comfort her with empty words, just stayed close while she grieved for everything she had lost. When the tears finally subsided, she wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Do not be. You have earned the right to cry." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in daylight. He was probably in his mid-20s, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. A scar ran along his jawline, pale against his tanned face. His hands, resting on his knees, were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who worked hard for everything he had. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Would you rather I had not?" "No, of course not. I just mean you do not know me. You could have ridden past, left me to die." Preston was quiet for a long moment. "My sister died 5 years ago. She was traveling with her husband when their wagon was attacked by bandits. He was killed, and she was left to die in the desert. A rancher found her 3 days later, but it was too late. She had already passed." He met Rebecca's eyes. "I swore after that I would never pass by someone in need. I could not save my sister, but I can help others." Rebecca's throat tightened. "I am sorry about your sister. So am I." He stood, offering his hand. "Come on, let us see what we can salvage." They worked together through the morning, sorting through her belongings. Some things were completely ruined, but others had survived relatively intact. Preston was methodical and patient, never complaining even when the work was tedious. By midday, they had a small pile of salvageable items. A few changes of clothes, some cooking supplies, a leather-bound journal that had been protected by its waterproof wrapping, and a small wooden box containing her mother's jewelry. "Your horses ran off during the storm," Preston said as they rested in the shade, "but they might not have gone far. I can try to track them this afternoon. And if you cannot find them, then you will ride with me to St. Joe. My horse can carry two." Rebecca looked at him, this stranger who had appeared in her darkest moment like an answer to a prayer. "Why are you going to St. Joe?" "Work. I heard there are ranches expanding in that area, looking for experienced hands. I have been working cattle drives for the past 6 years, but I am tired of constantly moving. I want to settle somewhere, build something permanent." 6 years on cattle drives, that must be hard. It is. Dangerous too. "Lost more friends than I care to count: stampedes, river crossings, accidents. Last drive I was on, a man fell from his horse and broke his neck. Just like that, he was gone. Made me realize life is too short to spend it always on the move. You have family waiting for you anywhere?" Preston shook his head. "Just me now. My parents died of cholera when I was 16. My sister was all I had, and after she passed, I threw myself into work. Seemed easier than dealing with the grief." Rebecca understood that impulse all too well. After her mother died 3 years ago, her father had remarried within 6 months, bringing a cold, calculating woman into their home. Her stepmother had immediately begun planning Rebecca's future, insisting she marry a wealthy merchant twice her age. The thought of spending her life trapped in a loveless marriage had been unbearable. That was why she had written to her Aunt Dorothy in St. Joe, begging for refuge. Her aunt had responded immediately, inviting Rebecca to come live with her and help run the boarding house. "My mother died 3 years ago," she told Preston. "My father remarried quickly. Too quickly, I think. He was lonely and vulnerable, and my stepmother took advantage. She wants to control everything, including who I marry." "Is that why you are running away?" "I am not running away. I am choosing my own path." Preston smiled, a real smile this time that transformed his serious face. "Fair enough." They spent the afternoon searching for Rebecca's horses, following tracks through the muddy terrain. Preston moved with the ease of someone completely at home in the wilderness, reading signs that Rebecca could barely see. But after several hours of searching, they had to admit defeat. The horses were long gone, probably miles away by now. "We will leave at first light tomorrow," Preston said as they returned to camp. "It is a full day's ride to St. Joe, maybe more with 2 of us on 1 horse." That evening they sat by the fire as twilight descended. Preston had shot a rabbit during their search, and it roasted on a spit over the flames, fat dripping and sizzling. The smell made Rebecca's stomach growl, and she realized she was adapting quickly to this rough way of living. "Tell me about your aunt," Preston said. "Aunt Dorothy." "She is my mother's sister. Strong-willed, independent, runs her boarding house like a general commanding troops. She never married, which scandalized the family, but she does not care what anyone thinks. I always admired that about her. She sounds like someone who would get along with you." Rebecca laughed. "What makes you say that? You insisted on coming to check your wagon even though you could barely walk. That takes a stubborn streak, or stupidity. I prefer to call it determination." They ate dinner as stars emerged overhead, and Rebecca found herself relaxing in a way she had not in months. There was something peaceful about sitting here with Preston, just the 2 of them and the crackling fire. He was easy to be around, never filling the silence with meaningless chatter but speaking thoughtfully when he did talk. "You miss your old life?" Preston asked eventually. "Before everything changed." "I miss my mother. I miss feeling safe and loved in my own home." but the life my stepmother was planning for me. No, I do not miss that at all. What did you want instead? Rebecca considered the question. Freedom, I suppose, the ability to make my own choices even if they are mistakes. I want to wake up each morning and feel like the day belongs to me, not to someone else's expectations. That is a good thing to want. What about you? What do you want? Preston stared into the fire. A place to call home, maybe a small ranch of my own someday, nothing fancy. A few cattle, some horses, a life that means something beyond just surviving day to day. He paused. Maybe someone to share it with eventually. You have not found anyone in your travels. Traveling constantly does not leave much room for building relationships. You meet people, share a night or two of conversation, then move on. Nothing lasting. Rebecca understood that loneliness, the ache of never truly connecting with another person. She had felt it acutely in her father's house after her stepmother arrived, surrounded by people but utterly alone. Well, she said softly, I hope you find what you are looking for in St. Joe. Preston looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. I hope we both do. That night, Rebecca lay in her bedroll staring up at the stars, thinking about the strange twist of fate that had brought Preston into her life. 24 hours ago, she had been alone and terrified, certain she was going to die. Now she felt safer than she had in years, protected by this quiet cowboy who asked for nothing in return for his kindness. She fell asleep to the sound of Preston's steady breathing across the fire, and for the first time since leaving home, she did not have nightmares. They set out at dawn, Preston helping Rebecca mount his horse before swinging up behind her. The animal was a sturdy bay gelding, calm and well-trained. Preston's arms encircled Rebecca as he held the reins, and she found herself hyper-aware of his presence, the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the way he adjusted his position to make sure she was comfortable. If you need to rest, just say so, he told her as they started down the trail. The morning was beautiful, the storm having cleared the air and left everything sparkling. They rode through rolling hills dotted with wildflowers, following a well-worn trail that would eventually lead them to St. Joe. Preston pointed out landmarks and shared stories from his travels, and Rebecca found herself laughing more than she had in months. Around midday, they stopped beside a creek to rest the horse and eat. Preston had packed the remaining supplies from Rebecca's wagon, and they made a simple meal of dried meat and hardtack. The creek burbled over smooth stones and birds sang in the cottonwood trees overhead. How long until we reach St. Joe? Rebecca asked. Maybe 4 more hours at this pace. We should arrive before dark. What will you do when we get there? Do you have a place to stay? Preston shrugged. I will find a room somewhere, start asking around about work. Rebecca hesitated, then said, My aunt runs a boarding house. I am sure she would have a room for you. And she might know which ranches are hiring. I do not want to impose. You saved my life. The least I can do is help you find a room and a job. He smiled at her, and Rebecca felt something flutter in her chest, a feeling she could not quite name, but that left her slightly breathless. They continued riding into the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they drew closer to civilization. They passed other travelers on the road, and Preston always nodded politely but kept moving. Rebecca noticed how protective he was, how his body tensed whenever they encountered strangers until it was clear there was no threat. You are always on guard, she observed. The frontier makes you cautious. I have seen too many people hurt because they were not paying attention. That must be exhausting. You get used to it. Rebecca thought about that, the idea of living in constant vigilance, never fully relaxing. It seemed like a lonely way to exist, and she found herself hoping Preston could find the peace he was looking for. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Buildings appeared in the distance. St. Joe sprawled along the Missouri River, a bustling frontier town that served as a jumping-off point for pioneers heading west. The streets were crowded with wagons and horses, people shouting and conducting business in the fading light. Preston guided his horse through the chaos, clearly experienced in navigating busy towns. Rebecca directed him to her aunt's boarding house, a large two-story building painted white with blue shutters. A sign reading Kensington House swung from a post in the front yard. Before they could dismount, the front door burst open and a woman rushed out. She was in her early 50s, with graying brown hair pulled into a practical bun and sharp green eyes that immediately assessed the situation. "Rebecca," she hurried to the horse. "Oh, my dear, your father sent a telegram saying you had left over a week ago. I have been so worried." Preston dismounted first, then helped Rebecca down carefully. Her aunt noticed immediately how gently he handled her, how Rebecca winced as her feet touched the ground. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "There was a storm. My wagon overturned." Rebecca gestured to Preston. "This is Preston Xavier. He saved my life." Dorothy turned her sharp gaze on Preston, studying him with the intensity of someone who had spent years evaluating the character of strangers seeking lodging. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her because she nodded briskly. "Then you have my eternal gratitude, Mr. Xavier. Please, both of you come inside. Rebecca needs to be examined by a doctor, and you look like you could use a hot meal and a proper bed." "I do not want to intrude," Preston began, but Dorothy cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Nonsense. Any friend of Rebecca's is welcome in my home. Besides, I have empty rooms and you clearly need one. Come along now before it gets fully dark." She ushered them inside, calling out orders to someone named Martha. The interior of the boarding house was warm and welcoming, with polished wood floors and comfortable furniture. The smell of cooking food made Rebecca's stomach rumble despite their earlier meal. Dorothy led them to the kitchen, where she insisted they sit at the large table while she fussed over Rebecca's injuries. A plump woman with kind eyes, Martha. The cook immediately set about preparing plates of food. "The doctor is having dinner with his family, but I will send word for him to come by after," Dorothy said, gently probing Rebecca's ribs. "This is quite a bruise. You are lucky nothing is broken." Preston checked me right away. He made sure I did not have any serious injuries before he moved me. Dorothy glanced at Preston with approval. "Smart thinking. Have you had medical training?" "Just what I picked up on cattle drives. You learn to handle injuries when you are days away from proper help." "Well, you did well. My niece is fortunate you were there." Martha set steaming plates before them roast chicken, potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread with butter. Rebecca thought it might be the best meal she had ever seen. They ate hungrily while Dorothy peppered them with questions about what had happened. Preston let Rebecca tell most of the story, only adding details when she asked him to. "Providence," Dorothy declared when they finished. "Pure providence that Mr. Xavier was camped nearby. I shudder to think what might have happened otherwise. Please call me Preston." "Only if you call me Dorothy. None of this formal nonsense under my roof." She stood, brushing crumbs from her apron. "Now, Rebecca, I am going to take you upstairs and get you settled. Martha, please show Preston to the blue room on the second floor. It has a proper bath, and I suspect he would appreciate cleaning up." Preston started to protest, but Dorothy fixed him with a look that clearly brooked no argument. "You saved my niece's life. The very least I can do is provide you with a comfortable room for as long as you need it. We will discuss payment later." He nodded, recognizing when he was beaten. "Thank you. I appreciate your hospitality." Rebecca caught his eye as they were being led in different directions. "Thank you," she mouthed. He smiled. a warm expression that made her heart skip. "Get some rest," he said aloud. Dorothy helped Rebecca upstairs to a pretty room with lace curtains and a quilted bed. A basin of warm water sat on the dresser, and her aunt helped her wash and change into a clean nightgown. "He seems like a good man," Dorothy said as she brushed Rebecca's hair. "He is. I would be dead without him. And handsome too, Aunt Dorothy. I am just making an observation." But her eyes twinkled with amusement. "How long were you two traveling together?" "Just 2 days. He found me after the accident and took care of me." 2 days in close quarters can tell you a lot about a person's character. What did you learn about him? Rebecca thought about Preston's quiet strength, his gentleness despite his rough exterior, the sadness in his eyes when he talked about his sister. "He is kind, thoughtful. He has been through hard things, but it did not make him bitter, and he is lonely, though I do not think he would admit it." "And how do you feel about him?" "I barely know him." "That was not what I asked." Rebecca met her aunt's eyes in the mirror. "I feel safe with him and comfortable, like I have known him much longer than 2 days. Is that strange?" "Not strange at all. Sometimes we recognize kindred spirits immediately." Dorothy set down the brush. "The doctor should be here soon. Rest until then." After the doctor's visit, during which he confirmed that Rebecca had no broken bones, just severe bruising that would heal with rest, she lay in the comfortable bed and found herself thinking about Preston. Was he comfortable in his room? Had he eaten enough? The urge to check on him was surprisingly strong, but exhaustion pulled her under before she could act on it. She slept deeply and woke to morning sunlight streaming through the curtains. Her body still ached, but the pain was less intense than the day before. She dressed slowly, choosing a simple green dress that did not require tight lacing, and made her way downstairs. The boarding house was bustling with activity. Several guests sat in the dining room eating breakfast, and she could hear Dorothy's voice coming from the kitchen. But it was Preston she spotted first, sitting alone at a corner table with a cup of coffee. He had bathed and shaved, and wore clean clothes, dark trousers, and a white shirt that made his tanned skin seem even darker. He looked up as she approached, and his face brightened. "You look better," he said, standing politely. "I feel better. How did you sleep? Like the dead? I cannot remember the last time I had a real bed." He pulled out a chair for her. "Sit. I will get you some breakfast." "You do not have to," but he was already heading to the kitchen. Rebecca shook her head, smiling. He returned moments later with a plate loaded with eggs, bacon, and toast, plus a cup of coffee. "Your aunt told me to make sure you ate," he said, settling back into his chair. "She is quite formidable. She always has been. When I was little, she terrified and fascinated me in equal measure." They ate together, falling into easy conversation. Preston told her about his plans to visit several ranches that day to inquire about work, and Rebecca mentioned that Dorothy had already given her several names to pass along. "Your aunt is very helpful. She likes you. She told me so this morning." Something flickered in Preston's expression, pleasure maybe, or surprise. "I like her too. She reminds me a bit of my mother, strong and practical. Will you come back this evening to let us know how your search went?" "If you want me to, I do." Rebecca realized how much she meant it. The thought of Preston riding away and not returning made her chest feel tight. Preston left after breakfast, and Rebecca spent the day helping Dorothy around the boarding house despite her aunt's protests that she should rest. The work was light, folding linens, arranging flowers, chatting with guests, but it felt good to be useful. Throughout the day, her thoughts kept drifting to Preston. She wondered how his meetings were going, if anyone had offered him work. He returned just as the sun was setting, his expression tired but satisfied. Rebecca had been watching for him from the front window, and she met him at the door. "Well," she asked, unable to hide her eagerness. I have 3 offers. 2 from ranches about an hour outside town, and 1 from a man who is starting a horse breeding operation just south of here." "That is wonderful. Which will you choose?" "The horse breeder, I think. A man named Thomas Crawford. He has some excellent stock and wants to build something special. It is hard work but interesting, and the pay is fair." "When do you start?" "Tomorrow, if I want. But I told him I needed a few days to get settled first." Dorothy appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "I heard voices. Preston, did you find work?" He repeated the news, and Dorothy beamed. "Excellent. This calls for a celebration. Martha is making a special dinner tonight, roast beef and apple pie. You will join us, of course." It was not really a question, and Preston did not bother trying to refuse. That evening, they gathered around the dining table with Dorothy, Martha, and 2 of the long-term boarders, an elderly professor and a young schoolteacher. The conversation was lively and warm, and Rebecca found herself laughing more than she had in years. Preston fit in seamlessly, his quiet humor and thoughtful observations making him immediately popular with the group. Rebecca watched him across the table, noticing the way the lamplight caught in his dark hair, the lines that appeared around his eyes when he smiled. She was growing dangerously fond of him, and the realization both thrilled and frightened her. After dinner, Preston helped clear the table despite everyone's protests. Rebecca joined him in the kitchen, where they washed dishes side by side. "You do not have to do this," she said. "I want to. I am not used to sitting idle." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, then Preston said quietly, "I have been thinking." "About what?" "About how strange life is. 2 days ago, I was just another drifter, heading to a new town to look for work. And now," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "now I feel like maybe I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Rebecca's heart raced. "Because of the job, partly." He set down the dish he was washing and turned to face her, "But mostly because I met you." She stood frozen, barely breathing as he took a step closer. "I know we have only known each other a few days," he continued. "And maybe this is crazy or too fast, or any number of things that make no logical sense. But Rebecca, I cannot stop thinking about you. About your courage, your kindness, the way you laugh. About how I feel when I am near you." "How do you feel?" she whispered. "Like I am home." Rebecca reached up, placing her hand against his cheek. "I feel the same way. I thought I was just grateful because you saved my life, but it is more than that. So much more." Preston covered her hand with his own, his eyes searching her face. "I do not have much to offer you. I am just a cowboy with a new job and some savings. But if you would let me, I would like to spend more time with you, to see where this might go. I would like that very much." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and happier than she had ever seen him. Then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, a question and an answer all at once. Rebecca's eyes fluttered closed, her hand sliding from his cheek to the back of his neck. The world narrowed to just the 2 of them, standing in Dorothy's kitchen with dishwater dripping from their hands, sharing a kiss that felt like a promise. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to court you properly," he said, "with dinners and walks and all the things a lady deserves. I am not very good at being a proper lady. Good. I am not very good at being a proper gentleman." They both laughed, and then they were kissing again, deeper this time, months and years of loneliness melting away in each other's arms. The next several weeks passed in a blissful haze. Preston started his job with Thomas Crawford, working long days training horses and building the new breeding operation. But every evening, he returned to St. Joe to see Rebecca. They took walks along the river, shared dinners at the boarding house, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. Dorothy watched their courtship with approval, though she made sure to chaperone appropriately. The other boarders quickly became invested in the romance, offering advice and teasing them good-naturedly. Rebecca helped her aunt run the boarding house and discovered she had a talent for managing the accounts. Dorothy began teaching her more about the business, hinting that someday Rebecca might take over operations entirely. "You have a good head for numbers," Dorothy said one afternoon as they reviewed the ledgers, "and people trust you. Those are valuable skills." "I never thought of myself as a businesswoman." "Why not? You are smart, capable, and you are not afraid of hard work. That is all you really need." One Saturday evening, about 6 weeks after Preston had first arrived in St. Joe, he asked Rebecca to take a walk with him. They strolled to a quiet spot by the river, where cottonwood trees swayed in the breeze and fireflies danced in the gathering dusk. "I bought some land," Preston said abruptly. Rebecca turned to him in surprise. "What?" 50 acres about 3 miles from Crawford's ranch. It has a creek running through it, good grazing, some timber. It is not much right now, just raw land, but I can build something there." "Preston, that is wonderful. Crawford is giving me a few horses as a bonus for the work I have done. Good breeding stock. I can start my own operation, build it slowly while I keep working for him." He took her hands in his. "I am telling you this because I want you to know I am serious about building a future here, a real future." "I never doubted that, Rebecca." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you trapped under that wagon, looking up at me with those fierce eyes, refusing to give up even when you must have been terrified. These past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life, and I cannot imagine going back to the way things were before." Tears pricked Rebecca's eyes. "I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. Then marry me." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I know it is fast and I should probably have a ring and make this more romantic, but I cannot wait any longer. Marry me, Rebecca. Help me build something real on that land. Make a home with me." Yes. She did not even have to think about it. Yes, absolutely yes. Preston swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. She laughed, dizzy with joy, and when he set her down, he kissed her with such fierce tenderness that she felt it all the way to her toes. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, both grinning like fools. Dorothy took one look at their faces and knew immediately what had happened. "Well," she said, trying to look stern but failing miserably, "I suppose I should start planning a wedding." They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the local church. Rebecca wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her, and carried wildflowers that Preston had picked that morning. Dorothy cried through the entire service, as did Martha and several of the boarders who had become like family. Thomas Crawford attended, along with several of the ranch hands Preston had befriended. Even the elderly professor gave a touching speech about love and new beginnings. But for Rebecca, the only person who mattered was Preston, standing beside her in his best suit, his eyes shining with emotion as they spoke their vows. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. They spent their first night as a married couple in a small house that Preston had been building on their land. It was not finished, just a rough cabin with a roof and walls, but he had made sure there was a proper bed and a wood stove. "It is not much," he said as he carried her over the threshold. "It is perfect," Rebecca assured him. And it was because they were together. That first year of marriage was hard work but deeply satisfying. They finished building the house together, adding rooms and a front porch. Preston worked with Crawford during the day while Rebecca continued helping Dorothy at the boarding house. In the evenings and on weekends, they worked their own land, building fences, training the horses Preston had acquired, and slowly establishing their breeding operation. Money was tight, and there were setbacks: a harsh winter that killed two of their best mares, a barn roof that collapsed under heavy snow and had to be rebuilt. But they faced everything together, and somehow that made even the hard times bearable. Rebecca proved to have a natural way with horses, and Preston taught her everything he knew. She spent hours working with the young stock, gentling them and teaching them basic commands. Several buyers specifically asked for horses Rebecca had trained, saying they had better temperaments. "You are a natural," Preston told her one evening as they watched a young colt she had been working with trot calmly around the paddock. "Better than me, maybe. I learned from the best. I am serious. You have a gift." Rebecca leaned against the fence rail, watching the colt. "I never imagined my life would look like this. A year ago, I was trapped in my father's house, miserable and suffocated. Now look at me running a horse ranch with my husband." Preston wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I ever thought possible." In their second year of marriage, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. Preston became absurdly protective, insisting she stop working with the horses and rest constantly. Rebecca tolerated his fussing for about a week before she put her foot down. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she told him firmly. "I will be sensible, but I am not going to spend the next 6 months sitting idle." "But what if something happens? Then we will deal with it together, just like we deal with everything." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Our baby needs a mother who is strong and capable, not one who is afraid of her own shadow," Preston sighed. "You are right." "I am sorry. I am just scared." "So am I. But we will figure it out." Their son was born on a cold November morning, arriving 3 weeks early and screaming with impressive volume. Preston held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he marveled at the tiny, perfect human they had created. "He is beautiful," Preston whispered, "just like his mother." They named him Thomas, after Thomas Crawford, who had given Preston his start. Baby Thomas was a colicky infant who did not sleep through the night for months, but Rebecca and Preston took turns walking him, singing to him, and somehow surviving on very little sleep. Dorothy was a constant presence, helping with the baby and the household while still running her boarding house. She had become not just Rebecca's aunt but her dearest friend and confidante. As Thomas grew into a curious toddler, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and their daughter named Elizabeth after Preston's mother arrived on a sunny spring day. She was a calm, sweet-natured baby who seemed fascinated by everything around her. The ranch continued to prosper. Word spread about the quality of their horses, and they began receiving orders from as far away as Kansas City and Omaha. Preston hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, and they built a larger barn and additional corrals. On their 5th anniversary, Preston surprised Rebecca with a beautiful chestnut mare from excellent bloodlines. "For you," he said, leading the horse into the paddock where Rebecca was working, "to start your own breeding program." Rebecca ran her hands over the mare's sleek coat, tears of joy pricking her eyes. "She is perfect, but this must have cost. You have earned it 10 times over. You work as hard as I do, and your training skills are bringing in almost as much money as the horse sales. This ranch is as much yours as it is mine." "Ours," Rebecca corrected. "Everything we have is ours together." That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on their front porch watching the sun set over their land. 5 years ago, Rebecca had been trapped under a wagon, certain she was going to die. Now she had a husband she adored, 2 beautiful children, and a thriving ranch. Sometimes the magnitude of how her life had changed overwhelmed her. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, reaching over to take her hand. "About that storm. About how scared I was when the wagon tipped. I still have nightmares about it sometimes, about what would have happened if I had been camped somewhere else, if I had not heard the crash. But you did hear it. You were exactly where you needed to be." Preston lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Do you remember what I said in Dorothy's kitchen, the night I first kissed you? You said you felt like you were home. I still feel that way, every single day." He turned to face her fully. "You are my home, Rebecca. You and Thomas and Elizabeth. Everything I have, everything I am, it is all because you chose to build a life with me." Rebecca leaned over to kiss him, tasting salt from the happy tears streaming down her face. "I will always choose you. In every lifetime, in every storm, I will always choose you." They sat together as stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first night together in the wilderness. So much had changed, but the fundamental truth remained. They had found each other against impossible odds, and they had built something beautiful together. Years continued to pass, bringing more children, 2 more sons and another daughter. The ranch expanded, eventually spanning 300 acres and becoming one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Missouri. Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved working with the horses, just like his parents. Elizabeth inherited her mother's gift for training, while the younger children each found their own passions. Dorothy lived to see all of her great-nieces and great-nephews, passing away peacefully at the age of 78 with Rebecca holding her hand. They buried her on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and Rebecca visited the grave often, telling her aunt about the children and the horses and everything happening in their lives. Preston's hair turned silver, and lines deepened around his eyes, but to Rebecca, he was just as handsome as the day he had lifted that wagon off her. They still worked the ranch together, though their children and grandchildren did most of the heavy labor now. Every evening they sat on their porch watching the sunset, holding hands just like they had since the beginning. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw a huge celebration. The whole town turned out, along with friends from ranches all across the region. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. At one point, Preston pulled Rebecca away from the crowd, leading her to the barn where they could have a moment of quiet. 30 years, he marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both, Rebecca said. It is both. Preston reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I never properly proposed to you, never gave you a ring when I asked you to marry me. Preston, you do not have to. Hush. Let me do this. He opened the box, revealing a beautiful gold band set with a single perfect diamond. Rebecca Kensington Xavier, you are the love of my life, my partner, my best friend. You have given me 30 years of happiness beyond anything I ever dreamed possible. Will you continue to be my wife for whatever time we have left? Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Always yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and they stood together in the barn surrounded by the gentle sounds of horses, holding each other like they had on that first night when a storm had brought them together. They had 20 more good years, watching their children raise families of their own and continuing to work the ranch they had built together. Preston passed first, quietly in his sleep at the age of 77. Rebecca held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering that she loved him and would see him again soon. She lived 3 more years, spending her days surrounded by family and horses, the 2 things she had always loved most. On a warm June evening, almost exactly 50 years after the storm that had changed her life, Rebecca sat on her porch watching the sunset. Her oldest grandson sat beside her, and she told him the story she had told countless times before. "Your grandfather saved my life," she said. "I was trapped under an overturned wagon in a terrible storm, certain I was going to die. But he found me. He lifted that wagon off me and checked me for broken bones, so gentle even though I was a complete stranger. And from that moment on, we were never apart. Do you miss him?" Her grandson asked. "Every single day. But I am so grateful for the life we had together. 53 years of marriage, 5 children, 18 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren so far, a ranch that is still thriving. We built something real, something lasting." "You are going to be with him again soon, are you not?" the boy asked, his voice trembling. Rebecca smiled, patting his hand. "I am. And I am not afraid. How could I be when I am going home?" She passed that night peacefully with family gathered around her. They buried her next to Preston on that hillside overlooking the ranch, under a headstone that read, "Together in this life and the next." The ranch continued through generations, each one adding to the legacy that Rebecca and Preston had started. And sometimes, on stormy June evenings, people swore they could see 2 figures standing on the hillside, a tall cowboy with silver hair and a woman in a green dress, holding hands and watching over everything they had built together. Their love story became legend in St. Joe, told and retold until no one could quite separate fact from myth. But the truth was simpler and more profound than any legend. 2 people had found each other in the worst moment of their lives and had chosen, every single day thereafter, to keep choosing each other. That was the real miracle, not dramatic rescues or impossible odds, but the simple, powerful decision to build a life together one day at a time. And in the end, that was all that mattered. They had loved completely, lived fully, and left behind a legacy that would endure for generations. From tragedy and storm had come the greatest blessing either of them could have imagined, a love that transcended time, circumstance, and even death itself. Their story was proof that sometimes, in our darkest moments, salvation arrives in unexpected forms. Sometimes it wears a cowboy hat and has gentle hands. Sometimes it looks like the end, but turns out to be the beginning of everything we never knew we needed. Rebecca and Preston Xavier had found their happy ending, and it was more beautiful than any fairy tale because it was real, messy, difficult, and absolutely worth every moment.